Be seated, thank you. John 12 today, and really this, what we just did is just really kind of a good illustration of this truth. Let me just kind of set this up for you. I want you to look at John 12. We're going to talk about the triumphal entry of Jesus. Let me just read a few verses of this story, then I'm going to kind of unpack what happens afterwards and try to tie this together. Jesus presents himself as the true king, and he reveals to us his glory, talks about the glory of God. We're going to find out what is true glory, where do we find that true glory, and then what happens in our life, what happens to us when it comes into our lives. And so some of you are thinking, well, glory is a big concept, and I really do understand that. I'm going to try to, if I have the vocabulary, I'm going to try to explain it to you in a way that I think will make practical sense. John 12, verse 12, and the next day, much people that were come to the feast, they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. They took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. And Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written, fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, thy king cometh. Now this is a prophecy. Jesus is coming as king, sitting on an ass's colt. These things understood not his disciples at first, but when Jesus was glorified, and I want you to underline that word. We're gonna come back to that word. It's used several times in this passage. They remembered these things were written of him, and that they had done these things unto him. And the people, therefore, that was with him when he called Lazarus out of the grave and he raised them from the dead, bear record. They validated, they testified this is true. For this cause the people rejoiced, the people who also met him, for they had heard that he had done this miracle. And the Pharisees therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him. It's an idiom expression. It literally means this, that the whole world is being drawn to Jesus, all right? And being drawn to him is one thing, being impacted by him is something entirely different. When I was diagnosed with cancer in 2019, I had something happen to me this week that triggered this thought. I went through a number of procedures. In fact, I had an entire day of procedures at the Mayo Clinic. Started early in the morning, went to late in the afternoon. My last procedure that day was a full body CT scan. And you have to just picture this with me. It was a long day. I'd met with the doctor a few times in between the different procedures and tests that were being done. And they were all trying to be kind and use humor, like there's awkward humor that doctors use, there's awkward humor that pastors use, there's awkward humor that dads use, right? Everybody's got their own brand of awkward humor. And so the doctor said to me, he said, we're really only doing the CT scan for two reasons. We want to find out if there's any cancer anywhere in your body, and we want to know if you have a brain and a heart. I'm like, okay, that's really funny, right? So I went in to where the technician was getting ready to do the CT scan. He used the same joke, right? And then he said to me, he goes, we are gonna know everything about you that could possibly be known. Now, most of you know me well enough to know that I think about a lot of things that I don't ever say. Sometimes I say them, that's probably not always good that I say them. I was thinking, there are things that you don't know about me that CT scan is not gonna show, right? There's things about my life that are infinitely more important than my body that you can't see. You can't see for example, what the Bible describes in Hebrews 4, the intents and thoughts of the heart. You can't see the inner motivation of somebody's life. You don't really know what's going on the inside. If I could put you under a spiritual CT scan and we could get at the strong desire, the inner drive, the strong motivations to reveal the deep insecurities that all of us have, you and me, you would find something like this, that all of us really wonder deep inside, do we matter? Do our lives have meaning and purpose? Is what we're doing going to make any kind of difference at all? And the good news is, in a way that probably most of us don't think about, the triumphal entry of Jesus has to do in profound ways with knowing whether or not you matter, or knowing how your life, how you can find meaning and purpose in your life. The glory of God is mentioned 4 times in this passage. So we're going to talk about the kingly nature of Jesus, and we're going to tie it to this idea of God's glory. We're going to learn what is true glory, where do you find it, and what happens when it comes into our lives. Simply put, you will find your glory. You will discover in ways that will transform you that you matter in the worship of Jesus and the revealing of his glory. This passage, this story, probably more than any other, is at least as much as any other, teaches us what it is, why it is imperative for you and for me to worship Jesus as the true King. If you're following along in the outline, this will help you. Let me just kind of move through this. I'm gonna take a quick pass, a little deeper pass, and then I'm gonna spend hopefully the bulk of the time in the last thought on why this really matters to you. First of all, let's talk about the nature of the true King. Why does the kingly nature of Jesus, why does it matter who Jesus is? 2 things are really important. Let me explain those to you. We have an infatuation, to some degree, we have an infatuation with the whole idea of royalty. I don't particularly, but a lot of people do. Like, for example, have any of you had spent any time at all this week trying to figure out what happened to Princess Kate? Right? Like, if you did, that wouldn't surprise me. If you didn't, you're kind of a person after my own heart, right? I'm not curious about it at all. But we have this infatuation. We want to know, where is she, right? Was she abducted? Did she die? Right? And then we found out the truth, right, towards the end of the week. We have this memory trace. This is important. With this memory trace that is built into us as human beings. And we know that there has to be something bigger and better out there, right? And that we need somebody bigger and stronger and better than us to come and save us. If you don't think about that, it can kind of just pass you by, and you just kind of, well, yeah, I just live my life and I don't think about those kind of things. But here, process this for a moment. Let's play a little word association game. I'm gonna name a person, and you tell me who they are. Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark. Okay, now think about all that for a moment. So the Marvel comics kind of ingratiated themselves into culture and society. So what do you have? You have a human Clark Kent, and you have this supernatural Superman, right? You have human Bruce Wayne, you have supernatural Batman, you have human, right, Tony Stark or Robert Downey Jr., however you want to look at it. And then you have the counter that you have the superhero, right, Iron Man. Why do those stories present to us a human and a non-human element, an otherworldly kind of element? Because in our own memory trace, we know that whatever it is that we need in life, whatever it is that we're looking for, whatever sits at the very bottom of the vacuum that exists in the human heart, there has to be something bigger and better than the best human that ever lived. We need somebody like Tony Stark or Superman. Batman. Or actually, we need the true and better Batman, the true and better Superman, the true and better Iron Man. We need Jesus, right? And so what you see in this story, two things very quickly. You see this. You see that the true king is a lion. And you say, where do you get that? Well, here's the point, that the king comes sitting on an ass's colt. This king is going to come, Zechariah 9 and verse 9. He comes, he is just, has salvation's lowly, and he's riding upon a donkey. When the king comes, he comes as a lion. That's the superhero side of him. He is going to be triumphal in his entry into Jerusalem. He is going to come, these people believe, to end war, bring peace to the nation, to rule over Jerusalem. When he comes, when the king comes as a lion, when he comes, all the chaos in our life, all the confusion in our life, all the complexities of our life are going to be brought to order, brought to peace, brought to harmony, and he's going to make sense out of everything. So that's the king as a lion. But he's not just a lion, he's a lamb, right? He doesn't come on a white horse. He doesn't come as a majestic person. He actually is described as lowly and bringing salvation. Jesus is going to come and shed his blood to fulfill the covenant that God had made so that prisoners could go free. What this story, what the triumphal entry is getting at is that there's a beauty and a glory in Jesus that is unmatched. The last week of Jesus' life is going to put the humanity and the deity of Jesus on displays in ways that are going to cause you to step back and look at him and begin to wonder and begin to marvel. And you see that the humanity of Jesus, he's lifted up on a donkey, and the deity of Jesus, he's going to be lifted up on a cross. And so what you have is this radically indescribable, glorious person, Jesus, who appears. Jonathan Edwards, in his famous sermon, 1738, on the excellency of Christ, it's a sermon based on Revelation chapter 5, and he is, in essence, saying, this is the point of his sermon, John went to look for a lion, and when he went to look for a lion, he found a lamb. Now, what that means is that in Jesus, there is infinite highness and infinite accessibility, infinite justice, infinite grace, infinite humility, infinite majesty, infinite transcendent meekness, but absolute sovereignty, perfect submission, and yet all sufficiency in himself. He's a lamb, but he's a lion. He's a rock. He's a pearl. He's a mighty captain. He's a tender lover, a fragile flower. He's a mighty tree of life. There is nobody, there is no glory like Jesus' glory. Which brings us to this, the glory of the true king. So now, we know that there's uniqueness about Jesus. He's both lion and lamb. There's a human and divine side of that. We have to unpack that a little further. There are two primary ways that God reveals his glory. This is important. God is communicating to us. You can live all your life and think, do I matter? Is God trying to speak to me? Is God trying to communicate with me? Is God trying to reveal himself to me? Do I matter to God? Is God trying to get my attention in life? When you think about this story, you see in verse number 20 that the Greeks that had come up to worship, they came and found two of his disciples, and they said, we would see Jesus. So they're really actually just living out what we suspicion be true. They have a desire to know Jesus, to see him, to come to him. And when they tell Jesus that people are seeking him, he says in verse 23, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. There's our word. Now he describes this. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it die, bring forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. If any man serve me, let him follow me, and where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor, him will my Father exalt. Verse 27, now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, the hour of my death, but for this cause came I unto this hour. Verse 28, Father, glorify thy name. It's an amazing statement. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but here's what Jesus is saying. You get a little bit about the glory of Jesus here. He says, Father, in this hour of my death, in this hour of my difficulty, when my soul is troubled, use what happens to me to glorify your name. And when he does, there comes a voice from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and I will glorify it again. Now, I don't know, but I thought about this early this morning. What would happen? I don't know what would happen to you, but I can tell you what would happen to me. If I prayed a prayer, right? If I said, hey, Father, glorify your name, and all of a sudden I heard an audible voice from heaven and God answered back, right? I mean, I'd probably be shocked to death. And here's the answer. God says, I have glorified it. Literally, I have been glorifying my name, and I am going to glorify my name again. So what does he mean by that? There's a literal interpretation. What he's actually saying is, since creation, remember Psalm 19 and verse number 1, where he says, the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament showeth forth his handiwork. Since creation, God has been glorifying his name. The creation of God points to the beauty and the power of God's artistic work. And yet the creation of God is to God's glory what the moon is to the sun. The sun is the source of light. The moon is just a reflection of that light. It's a reflector of light. It's not the full essence or the full expression of his glory. It's just a reflection of God's glory. In Hebrews chapter 1 and verse number 3, there's such a great description. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners hath in time past spake unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the world, who being, Jesus, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person. So Jesus is not the moon, he's the sun. When you see Jesus, you are seeing the essence, if you will, the most common denominator, the essence of God's own glory. And when you look at that, you say, hey, God has glorified himself up to this point through his creation, through his work in history over humanity, but now he's getting ready to glorify his name in ways that he's not done. That's the death of Jesus. So the creation of God is an expression of God's glory, but the cross, the crucifixion of Jesus, is the fullest expression of God's glory. So much so that look what Jesus says in verse 32. And if the Son of Man be lifted up, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto myself. It's a powerful statement. It gets at the heart of what we're saying today. Jesus is saying in verse 32, when you see the beauty of what I am doing on the cross, you will be attracted to me. When you see the beauty of my death, how powerful that it is, and that breaks into your life in ways that you understand it, you'll be drawn to me in a way that will profoundly and radically change everything there is about you. It'll change your life. It'll change your heart. It'll change the inner structure of your entire being, because there's something that's going to happen on the cross when I am lifted up from this earth that only the cross can do, and it'll free you, it'll empower you, it'll release you, it'll transform you. Let me explain this just quickly with a quick illustration. Yesterday, Tommy and I and some of the people in our church, we went to this gathering for a guy who a little over a year ago somebody actually was at my house and they told me, they called the guy's name. They said, hey, do you know he's in the hospital on a ventilator? I said, I did not know that. They said, he's not expected to live. And he had a severe alcohol addiction. And we prayed for him. Really, there wasn't a lot anybody could do. There just really wasn't a lot to do. 4 weeks later, and by the way, in his condition, he was given less than a 5% chance of ever getting off the ventilator. 4 weeks later, on a Sunday, he's standing down here after church after a Sunday morning service. And I was so surprised to see him. I mean, it was one of those kind of out-of-body experiences. I'm trying to piece all this together, like, where did you come from? And in conversation, he said, I need help. And yesterday, we celebrated 365 days of sobriety for him. And God's put his marriage back together. God's restored much of what he had lost, right? Now, you say, well, that's amazing. Oh, that's not the amazing thing. That's just that. I said all that to say this. So there's a guy there yesterday who is a friend of mine. He comes to our church. He said, I had a grandchild born today. He was explaining why his wife wasn't there. I said, really? I said, well, and the way we responded, Tommy and I were talking, the way I responded, it was kind of like we were both surprised. Why would you come when you just had a grandchild and your wife's still at the hospital with your daughter who's just given birth? Here's what he said. He said, in my mind, the two greatest miracles that have ever happened in the world is Jesus walking out of the tomb after 3 days after his death on the cross. He said, the second greatest miracle is seeing him, my nephew, delivered and what God has done in his life in 365 days. Now, let me tell you something. You say, how does that happen? Does a guy just kind of work up this new resolve to do better in life? No, it doesn't happen like that. I walked in this morning and see the same people every week. I love doing this. I think about this all the time. I know I'm getting old and someday I'm gonna have to stop doing this, but I love the relationships with people. This guy walks out, meets me at my car. I can tell he wants to talk to me, which is fine, he's normal. And he started talking fast. I said, hey, slow down. I said, we're not in a hurry. I said, whatever he wanted to tell me was important. He said, can I tell you what God did in my life? I said, sure. I said, take your time. He said, and he told me, he said, these are the two things in my life I could not get past. And they were besetting sins in his life. They were controlling him. They were holding him back. He said, a month ago, I started to fast and pray, and I asked God to deliver me. He goes, Pastor, he said, I'm the freest person in the entire church today. Now, by the way, I didn't say, no, you're not. I'm like, you know what happened? He saw the glory of Jesus break through in his life in a transforming way. When Jesus gets lifted up, when the glory of Jesus gets elevated in your life and you encounter the reality of what Jesus did on the cross, it will fundamentally change you. Two things very quickly, and I'm going to apply this to you. The cross shows us the glory of God's justice. Now, you say, where do you get that from? If you take verse 32 and you just back up 2 verses, Jesus answered and said, this voice came not because of me, but for your sakes. I didn't need to hear this. You needed to hear this. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. And by the way, Satan had a stronghold. He had the whole entire world, including every single fallen human being, in a death hold. He had a choke on every single person in the world. He had them under judgment, under bondage. And when Jesus went to the cross and was lifted up, on the cross for you, he became an instrument of the justice of God. And so the debt of your sin was paid and the righteousness of God was satisfied, and Satan lost his grip on the world. So the glory of God's justice, right, is what, on the cross, is what frees you. The wrath of God is satisfied, the debt of sin is paid, and the way is open for you to come back to God. But that leads you to this. The cross not only shows us the glory of God's justice, it shows us the glory of God's love. See, it's not just the justice of God on the cross, it's the love of God. John Stott said the essence of sin is man substituting himself in the place of God. The essence of salvation is God substituting himself for man. When you read verse 32 and it says, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto myself, you should read it this way. If Jesus wasn't lifted up on the cross, you would have had to be. And what Jesus did is he substituted himself for you so that you would not have to be lifted up on the cross, that you would not have to face the eternal wrath of God. You would not have to be crushed. You would not have to be killed. You would not have to be eternally separated from God. You could be free. In the movie, The Finest Hour, it's a movie about a Coast Guard recovery effort, 1952, off Cape Cod. Bernie Weber was a Coast Guard officer of the movie. There were 2 tankers that were broken in half by a northeaster. They didn't have a boat big enough, and they had 2 ships in 2 unique places. They had to make 2 rescues. And Weber said famously to the crew that was going out, this is what he said: you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. You have to go out, but you don't have to come back. Let me tell you something. Jesus is the one that said, I have to go out. I don't have to come back. He went out not just to risk his life. He went out to give up his life for you. So we worship Jesus. He's the true king, right? He is Lion and Lamb. He's a glorious king, the glory of his justice, the glory of his love. But then what does that do for us? What is the power of the true king? Now, if you don't encounter God's glory, just stay with me for a minute, I'll be done. If you do not have an experience with God's glory, you are becoming the worst version of you. When you encounter God's glory, when Jesus comes into your life to reign, you will become who God has made you to be. You will become the best version of yourself. I'm doing this study on Wednesday nights through 1 Samuel, and there's such a great study. I wish I could explain all of it to you, but in simple terms, right? You have Saul and you have David, and Saul, the presence of God, the Spirit of God has departed from Saul, and the presence of the Spirit of God has come upon David, and Saul is becoming the absolute worst version. And by the way, if Jesus doesn't come into your life, you become Saul. The best you can ever be is Saul. And all his flaws, all his character defects, all of the things that riddle him, that's what happens to you. Or, in your case, the good news is you don't become David, because Jesus is the true and better David. In your case, you actually become Jesus, right? You become the best version of you. When Jesus comes into your life, he transforms your character. He makes you a completely different kind of person. Now, let me explain to you how that happens. I'm going to just give you 3 experiences or 3 expressions of what happens when you encounter or you experience God's glory. When you understand, when the truth and reality of what Jesus did for you, what the nature of the true king, the glory of the true king can do in your life. First of all, here's the first thing that happens. God will become supremely important in your life. Now, I want you to get the weight of that statement. There are 2 words for glory in the Bible. The Old Testament Hebrew word is kabod. The New Testament word for glory is doxa. Doxa has to do with the illumination, the light of God's glory, the luminary nature of God's glory. Kabod literally means weight. Weight is in the sense of it's weighty or it's significant or literally it's matter. When the glory of God begins to break into your life and the reality of what Jesus has done for you and the reality of who Jesus becomes real in your life, he will become important in your life. That is, his will, his work, his relationship with you becomes the most important thing to you, so much so that you begin to center your life around him. You begin to get glory from him. You stop pursuing things for glory. You stop looking for glory in things that can't possibly give you glory, because whatever they reflect into your life, whatever they shine into your life, you cannot reflect those things and have ultimate beauty, meaning, and purpose. So God is either of some importance in your life or he is supremely important in your life. Here's how you know whether you really understand the cross or not. If God is of some importance to you, you do not understand the cross. If God is supremely important to you, you understand the cross in ways that are transforming you. If you said to me, take the sum of all Christianity, primarily that is expressed in Western civilization in 2024, I would tell you this, that the vast majority of people, God is of some importance to them. Very few people God is supremely important to. And the more that God is just somewhat important to you, the more aching, the more emptiness, the more longing, the more dissatisfaction, the more insignificant, the more insecure your life will become, because you're holding on to things, you're latching onto things, you're grasping at things that cannot give you what your soul absolutely desires, longs for, and needs, and you're suffocating under the shallowness of what the world offers to you. Here's the second thing that happens when you encounter God's glory. God will make sense of your sorrow. Now, this story is so remarkable. In the middle of the story, you get this sense in verse 23 that Jesus is talking about his life. The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except the corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, which he's about ready to do, it abides alone, but if it die, it brings forth much fruit. And we think, okay, he's talking about himself and his death. Then he says in verse 25, he that loves his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. And all of a sudden you begin to think, now is he talking about him or us? Right? What's the answer? Both. Verse 26. If any man serve me, let him follow me, and where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor. Now who is he talking about? He's just talking about us. He went from him to both, now to us, right? And then he comes back and he says, let me explain this to you. Now, right now, in this moment, my soul is troubled. We know in other places, if you look at it prophetically, he's saying my soul is about ready to be poured out like wax. I'm about ready. I am coming apart. And by the way, he would come apart. He would experience the uncreation. He would resort to what it is to live an empty life, right? The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And Jesus was heading back into uncreation. And he's saying, my soul is troubled. There is a principle woven into the fabric of the moral universe that you have to grasp. You cannot become the person God wants you to be, the person you desire to be, without suffering. It is absolutely impossible. It was the suffering of Jesus that was tied to his ultimate purpose for coming into the world and the way that God was going to be glorified. And the way that he was going to find meaning and purpose, ultimate reality, ultimate glory was through his suffering. And if the way that Jesus was going to find ultimate reality, meaning and purpose and glory through his suffering, then you and I have to embrace our suffering, because the only way you become a person of character, the only way that you become resilient, the only way that you become beautiful, the only way that you have depth, the only way that you have significance and meaning in your life is for you to embrace your suffering. You know, I would love, and there's a place for this, and I'm not saying there's not a place for this. I would love for you to come to church on Sundays and me just tell you happy thoughts. Like wouldn't it be good if you just came on Sunday and said, hey, nothing bad's ever gonna happen to you, right? Or wouldn't it be good if you just came to Sunday night and say, hey, everything always works out in life, right? And life is easy. Elena, being a mom's not hard, right? Being a wife, anybody can do it. But the reality is, you know that's not true, right? You're gonna go through hard things in your life. You're gonna be disappointed. I listened to somebody yesterday, and they were telling me about, and they said this like 3 times to me. They said, are we the only person that has gone through this? I said, no, everybody goes through that. Now, here's the problem. Some of you you're so afraid of suffering. You're insulating yourself. You're shrinking away from, and you're becoming angry and resentful and bitter towards God, and you're thinking that God doesn't care and God doesn't know what he's up to. Listen, if you will embrace your suffering, and if you will look at Jesus and you will say to the Father, glorify your name, use what I'm going through in my life in a way that you are glorified, you will find meaning and purpose in your life that you'll find no place else at all. It'll radically and fundamentally change everything about your life. It'll give you a security and a depth and a strength to your life that you can't get anyplace else. Jesus said, my soul is troubled, Father. In my suffering, glorify your name. You've got to embrace your suffering. And then thirdly, God will make you into something beautiful. Go down to verse 35. And this is what we all long for. This is what we all want. Jesus said, yet a little while is the light with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walketh in darkness knoweth not whither he goeth. See, you need glory. You need the glory of Jesus to break into your life, or you'll walk in darkness. While you have the light, believe in the light, that ye may be children of light. Have you ever heard this little expression? He or she is going to be a star, right? We use that. Think about how we do sports, right? We have all stars in sports, right? Or we might say this, they're a superstar, or they're a star in the making. What we're really saying is they're becoming the best version of, right? They're the best actor, the best actress. They're the best football player. They're the best baseball player. They're the best basketball player. They're the best volleyball player. The best softball player. They're a superstar in business. And we say, well, there's something about them. Here's what Jesus is saying to us. You want to shine bright? You want people to look at you and say, hey, you're children of the light. If you want people to look at you and say, hey, you are what a Christian is supposed to be, then what you have to do is you have to realize that the vast potential that rests inside of you, if it is going to be realized, if the power of God is going to come into your life, you have to let God's glory erupt in you. And when you do, you'll become who you are designed to be. You will experience the eternal weight of glory. C.S. Lewis wrote about that. You become a deeper, sweeter, wiser, humbler version of yourself, right? You stop being insecure. You stop being angry. You stop hiding and insulating yourself. You stop withdrawing from people. You stop running away from pain and conflict. You stop running away from the things that actually were designed to make you the better person that God wants you to become. Because you realize your glory doesn't matter. His glory is infinite. And when your life is on a collision course for his glory, it changes everything. Elizabeth Elliot said, if you don't see the sun, you'll be impressed by a street light. If you've never felt thunder and lightning, you'll be impressed with fireworks. It's an amazing thought, right? And if you turn your back on the greatness and majesty of God, you'll fall in love with a world of shadows and short-lived pleasures. But if you ever get a glimpse of the glory of God to break into your life, it'll radically transform you. It will whisper to you at the lowest, darkest point of your life, you matter because you matter to me. That's what you look for. That's what you need. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Stand with me if you would. Some of you really, really need to wrestle with the reality of that in your life. Some of you should start your prayer this way. God, I'm going through suffering, and as painful and as scary as this is today, my prayer is this: glorify your name in my suffering. That's your prayer. That sounds really scary. That's so counterintuitive. That's not the safe thing for you to do. But let me tell you something. If you can look up at a cross and you can see Jesus, the only truly righteous person who ever lived, who never deserved what he went through, and you can see him committing himself to God, right? Putting himself in God's hand, then you can say whatever it is plaguing you in your life, Father, glorify your name in what I'm going through. Whether it's a parent, whether it's work, whether it's whatever it is, glorify your name. Some of you, your prayer today needs to be this: I'm not really sure I'm a Christian. And it gets convoluted in my mind, and I keep thinking, well, I did this in my past, or I grew up this way, or I was exposed to this, and I've always believed this kind of thing. But if you don't look at Jesus lifted up on the cross, if the reality of that is not broken into your life in a way that you know that you belong to him, that you have been redeemed by his grace, today, what you need to do is pray this: God, may the reality of your death on the cross break into my life. Enough so that I call on you to save me. Today, why don't you come and bring those things that you struggle with, those burdens, and lay them down at the altar, and let Jesus, the glory of Jesus, the true King, right? The Lion and the Lamb, the glory of God's justice and the glory of God's love come into your life to transform you. Father, speak to us. Give us something today that goes beyond a feel good, but puts a rock, a foundation down that we can stand on, so that we can know that we matter to you, that we matter eternally. In Jesus' name, amen.